If the pandemic and lockdowns have made you an anxious news junkie, then you're probably aware that the US Postal Service might implode this year. How did it come to this, and what happens if we lose America's oldest public service?
Misinformation.
For anyone who doesn't know, the TLDR is this. Post office is out of money. Trump doesn't want to give it any money, and if the USPS does not get a bailout soon, then it may start falling in on itself as soon as next month.
What? Okay, fine, I'm cool, I'm fine.
And this brings us to the very fair question. How did we get here? The Postal Service is one of the oldest institutions in the United States, and in fact, it's actually older than the country itself. It was founded in 1775 by the Second Continental Congress, and the first ever Postmaster General was our bouncing Benjamin Franklin. But it's not just a Revolutionary War thing. The Postal Service is one of the few agencies explicitly called out in the Constitution. It's always been there, and that's because mail is an essential service when it comes to running a country. Up until the late 1990s, the only way you could really learn new daily information about the world beyond your doorstep was via the mail.
The exercise serves many purposes.
I'm not just talking about letters from your grandma, but also newspapers, magazines, bills. We ship goods to one another. The postal worker is seen as like this weird de facto quasi-family member that passes through your neighborhood every day. So much so that postal workers are on almost every kid's show. But if it's so important, then how the hell did we let it go broke? Well, like most governmental failures in the US of A, this one comes from short-sightedness and greed. In the early 1970s, postal workers went on strike to demand better pay and collective bargaining rights.
For the first time ever, letter carriers went on strike, and mail service in and out of New York was suspended. The government immediately obtained a court order against the strike, and union leaders ordered the carriers back to work. Many refused.
I don't like to go on strike, but we must because they've been pussyfooting too long.
You can't live in New York City on what they're giving you.
They won, but it came at a cost.
Injunctions have been sought, and in most cases already granted, forbidding striking postal workers from interfering with those who wish to return to work.
In response to these federal employees unionizing effectively, President Nixon decided to reorganize how that federal agency got its money.
What do you do with all your money?
You see, I'm a guy of simple taste.
In 1971, Nixon signed a new law establishing the USPS as an independent agency that had to pay for itself entirely. So starting that year, the post office stopped receiving tax dollars and was left to fund itself through the sale of stamps, boxes, and other shipping services. At the time, this was a win-win for the Republican Party. If it worked, Nixon would have proved that privatizing a government agency is possible without it losing its quality. And if it failed, Nixon could blame the unions and the workers for siphoning too much money off of the agency just for wanting to get, fair wages.
Will I get the operation now, Dad?
No, son. You're gonna die.
So is this why the post office is about to go bye-bye now? Well, no, not quite. This pay-for-itself thing actually did work out for a few decades.
What?
It's honestly pretty cool. I mean, people who bitch about how bad the Postal Service is clearly have never used it or have standards that are way too high. I mean, the post office literally handles hundreds of millions of mail items every single day. It's amazing. And what's even more amazing is that it did this for over 30 years without ever taking taxpayer money. It successfully paid for its own existence like a real grown-up. God, my fucking hair. But then the government decided to fix something that wasn't broken. In 2006, a Republican-controlled Congress passed legislation requiring the post office pay for all health benefits for its workers. This added at least an additional $5.5 billion to the post office's yearly expenses. And that's how we ended up where we are today. The post office was doing great, but then it was forced to take on this massive new debt which crippled it completely. By 2019, this one little law had saddled the post office with over $160 billion in debt. Or to put it in layman's terms, they're broke as shit. But hearing news like this is pretty normal in 2020, so I guess just add it to the list of our societal comeuppance. But this is not like the Electoral College or some antiquated government rule. This is not an issue we can just push off to another year. But why? What happens if the post office really does go under this year? Well, it means a dramatic decrease in mail, which actually is a huge problem when you're trying to run a country. In most articles you'll read on the subject that came out this year, authors will rightfully point out that this is an election year and a lot of people need to be voting by mail. It means we need the post office to exist to have a functioning democracy. And this is a great point, but if the post office disappears, there are going to be way more problems than just the election. The U.S. Postal Service processes and delivers over 472 million pieces of mail every day. Most of that ain't birthday cards. And yeah, I know, when you imagine mail, you probably think of letters and bills and just general junk mail. But a lot of mail, maybe most mail, is not that. During a global pandemic, we need the Postal Service to be able to ship medical supplies, future vaccines, any number of physical items that any of us might need. And in addition to all the super important shit, Americans are doing most of their shopping online now. How do you think Amazon 2-day shipping is possible? It's because of the US Postal Service. Almost every US business relies on the Postal Service to ship and deliver inventory, supplies, and products. If we let the post office go under, this could evaporate overnight, changing how all of us live and function. Or in layman's terms, this is a big freaking deal. I mean, sure, there's FedEx and there's UPS, but they don't have the ability or the manpower to handle the sheer volume that the post office handles on a daily basis. Literally everything would be affected if we lost the Postal Service, which is why this issue is so important. It'll affect hospitals, voting, almost every business, and you won't be able to order buckets of snacks to soothe your pandemic anxiety.
I'll take a potato chip and eat it.
So that's the what, the how, and the why we should care. The post office is important, silly. Boop! And that's the info about that.